Hello, welcome, and thank you for joining us. We are really looking forward to this conversation tonight. So we want to hear from you as we start to settle in. We're going to give it a couple minutes while people filter in from their days. We know that people are just getting off of work, and we're really excited that you are choosing to be with us tonight. So make sure you tell us where you're joining us from in the chat, and also what you are doing to enrich your community. So let us know where you're coming from. Hello from Oakland and Ohio. All right. We have team members from Ohio as well. I'm coming from California. We have team members coming from Atlanta and Pittsburgh, and we are really excited to see. We got all of our team represented here tonight. We got Worcester. Is it Worcester or Worcester? Worcester, isn't it? Welcome to Massachusetts, Spokane. Hello, Wisconsin. We love Wisconsin. We were just in Madison earlier this year for Kick Out the Clowns, and we're happy to see Wisconsin represented in the chat. All right. Love it. Thanks, Ben. You're hearing me out buttons that look like your handle. Fun. All right. Writing postcards, showing up where and when you can. That is half the battle of showing up. So we're happy that you are showing up for and in your community. Right. Just telling us what you are doing with your community. Because so much of what we can do in this moment really is checking in with each other, making human to human connection. So let us know how you are doing that. Now, tonight, we are going to have a really robust conversation, and we are going to be watching the chat for your questions. So make sure if you have questions throughout the conversation tonight, add them to the chat. We will be answering questions at the end of the session. We may not get to them at the moment that you post your question, but we are watching the chat and making sure that your questions get answered later in the evening, time permitting. So we also have some expectations of the chat. We are pretty heavy-handed on the band hammer here because we want the chat to be a place where people can all participate in the conversation. This means if you're trolling, you're going to get blocked and deleted. If you are abusing the chat and spamming it, overrunning the chat so that nobody else can get a word in edgewise, or that everybody else's comments are going to be lost because of yours, we're going to stop you from adding to the chat. Be courteous to each other, give each other space, and, keep the conversation moving politely. We do have closed captioning on Facebook. If you would like to watch tonight's chat with closed captions, please join us on Facebook. That's where you'll be able to see closed captions. YouTube hasn't caught up yet. We do also have some working agreements, so you are more than welcome to take a look at those. In short, though, be kind, approach with curiosity, and give each other the benefit of the doubt. Assume best intent from each other, and also act with good intent. That's really what we ask in a nutshell, but make sure that you are abiding by those kind of community guidelines in the chat. Again, we are heavy-handed on the band hammer. So keep telling us where you're joining us from tonight. We're excited to have you with us. Right, we have some folks, let's see, involved in mutual aid. We love to hear it. And hosting craftivism twice per month. We love craftivists. And that's where the pink hats came from. We're the craftivists. So we're happy to have you with us. Right. We have a lot of folks taking action in their communities, hold weekly demonstrations, Freedom Fridays, standing up for democracy. Right. Thank you for standing up for democracy. Now, I do have a quick question in the chat. This is a quick one we can answer. How long is this expected to last? We're going to be on for about an hour, 15 minutes. But we are also going to this is going to live on YouTube and Facebook after the live stream is over. So if you, for any reason, have to hop out at some point in the evening, that's okay. This will live on our YouTube. You can go back, finish it off later on your own time. All right. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're really excited to kick off this conversation. Be excellent to each other in the chat. And to introduce our topic tonight, I'm going to hand it over to Tamika Middleton.
Hey, good people. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank y'all for joining. We are very grateful to have you all here. I see Jessica asked if there was supposed to be music. Yes, we had a little background music situation going at the top to bring you in. So if you are heard background music, it should be done by now. If it's still going, then you definitely have a window open. So welcome, welcome, welcome. I am the Chief Political and Strategy Officer here at Women's March. And I'm always really grateful to be here with you. I use she, her pronouns. I am joining you all from Muskogee Creek Lands here in Atlanta, Georgia. I see so many of you from all over the country. We're always very, very grateful to have so many of you. And I did want to flag that I do know how to pronounce it. It is Worcester, Massachusetts. I know that because my husband is a Bostonian and he gets on me every single time I pronounce it incorrectly. So welcome to all of you. Shout out to our friends at Amarillo. I saw some South Carolinians in the building. Welcome. I'm also a native South Carolinian, so I'm really, really honored and glad that you joined us today. So this call is one that feels really, really important in this time. I just want to give a little bit of context. We are hosting, Women's March has been hosting throughout this year, twice a month, these mass organizing calls. And on these mass organizing calls, our intention is to help you find ways to get active. We believe very much in getting in wherever you fit in, taking some kind of action in support of your community, taking some kind of step in the fight to stop fascism, whatever that is. And our goal is to both help people come in and then help them find a place to land inside of the movement. So every single month, you can join us on these calls. You'll be introduced to people in different organizations doing different kinds of work. Every month, there's a different sort of niche or different sort of sector or front line of this movement. And we want you to actually listen deeply to what people are offering you about what the context is and what the fight is that they're in and the work that they're doing, but also be really clear about how you can plug in on the other side of it. We are in a battle, good people. We are in a fight against fascism. Fascism is very clearly marching forward in this country. And if we are going to stop it, if we are going to have any hope for democracy in this country, we have to be engaged consistently every step of the way. We have to be getting inside of organizations. We have to be taking action consistently all the time, being a part of this work. So with that, what we recognize in this moment is that we are in a crisis wherein the state, the federal government, the administration is threatening violence by a way of military occupation of a number of cities, in particular, cities that he can target in particular ways that have large Black and brown communities, that have Black mayors, that have, specific kinds of ways that they want to target and malign these communities. And he is doing so, he is threatening that by taking hold of a narrative and by really creating a narrative that will allow him to take liberties with people's freedom and people's rights. And so we want to both talk about that reality so that we can be aware of what is happening both in these cities, but broadly in terms of how they are weaponizing data, weaponizing statistics, but also because we recognize that it will not stop at LA. It will not stop at DC. It will not stop at Chicago. It will not stop at Baltimore, but everywhere around the country is at risk, right? Anytime he's taking a step, he's taking that step in a way that where he feels like it's easiest, and that is not the last step, right? And so we want to be prepared to battle or to fight back where we are, but we also want to be fighting in solidarity with our folks who are already on the front lines of that battle, because we want to stand with our community wherever they are. We want to stand with people who are impacted wherever they are. We want to constantly be a fight against fascism. So this call is one invitation into that. And so we have a phenomenal lineup of folks to really set us into that. So I'm going to name or introduce a little bit, really briefly read the bios of our speakers here, and then we're going to jump into a presentation. So our first speaker is Tamara Knopper, who is a sociologist, a writer, an educator, and an editor. She's the editor of We Do This Till We Free Us, Abolitionists Organizing and Transforming Justice, a book of Mariame Kaba's writings and interviews. She's a researcher and writer of several data stories for Colin Kaepernick's Abolition for the People series, and has conducted research for the Center for Just Journalism's A Journalist's Guide to FBI Crime Statistics. She's created and produced political education lectures for the public on crime data in collaboration with organizations and institutions such as the Asian American Writers Workshop, Haymarket Books, and Interrupting Criminalization. And she has conducted workshops on the politics of crime data for public defenders organizations and political campaigns. Second, we have Kelly Hayes, who is a Menominee author, organizer, movement educator, and photographer. She's the host of Truth Out's podcast Movement Memos and the creator of Organizing My Thoughts, a weekly newsletter about politics and justice work. She is co-author of the book Let This Radicalize You with Mariame Kaba, and editor of the upcoming book Read This When Things Fall Apart, Letters to Activists in Crisis. And our third speaker is Nene, who serves as the executive director of Nene Taylor, the executive director of Harriet's Wildest Dreams and a co-founder / organizing director of the Free DC Project, both dedicated to the liberation and empowerment of Black people. Her work centers on dismantling systemic oppression, protecting DC home rule, and building infrastructure for movement work in the DMV area. As a leader in her coalition, Nene is committed to disrupting, confronting, and dismantling systems of state-sanctioned violence that criminalize and oppress people while fueling intra-community violence. A vocal advocate for statehood, she is committed to making Washington, D.C. the 51st state. Thank y'all so much. We are very excited. And so with that, I am going to pass it to our first speaker, Tamara Knopper.
The organizers at Women's March for planning this and inviting me to be part of it. So I just want to make sure. All right, great. Let me start. So I'm going to talk about how crime data and conversations about crime are being used to justify the military takeover of cities and to really advance the agenda of President Trump and this administration in different cities. So as I'm sure many of you saw, President Trump had posted this on his Truth Social, and this is an actual image that he posted. It was verified that he did post this. And it's obviously a reference to war and the phrase, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning." So we see kind of this way that he's, suggesting that he's going to go to war against people and against cities. And this is an image at the top of a protest in Washington, D.C., where President Trump had taken over the local police department. And that partly has to do with D.C.'s relationship to not having a governor. And then this image in the bottom is of people protesting in Chicago in response to the threats that he's made of coming and bringing troops to Chicago. And so I just want to point out there's 3 interrelated issues here. My presentation won't get into all of this, but it's important to kind of sort out that these things are, interrelated, but they're often treated as interchangeable. One is there's the militarization of the police, and this is not the same as the military being used to police. And so there's a lot of work that's been done in terms of scholarship and politically to talk about things like police forces getting, tanks and getting increased kind of training and military gear to kind of do their job as law enforcement. Then there's the federal takeover of DC police, which is about to expire. And that's under the DC Home Rule Act. And again, that has to do with the fact that DC is not a state. And so that's why some of the stuff that people are saying is statehood now. Then there's the federal government, quote, requesting governors to deploy National Guard to police. And this is where, governors have the right to kind of refuse this request, but this is where some of the political pressure for how states deal with the federal government. And President Trump's, for example, against the George Floyd protest in Washington, D.C. in 2020, federal, a bunch of national or state governments sent their National Guards to DC at the request of the Trump administration. A few did refuse. But this is kind of important to kind of sort out some of these things, because this plays out in some of the ways that kind of some of the conversation about crime and crime data is also happening. So I just want to show you some of the kind of headlines and news stories and discourse that's out there about crime and crime data right now. So here's one page. And so if you just put like Trump crime data, and what you see is, there's all these debates about kind of, what does the data really say? And people are kind of pushing back against some of President Trump's initiatives and agenda, but they're doing it through this kind of emphasis on, what does the crime data really tell us? And so it's being kind of depicted as this whole debate about the data itself. And so here's another page of these type of headlines. And here's another page, right? And so it's kind of like, is it really as violent as you say? What do the facts say, right? We're going to do a fact check of the crime data and so forth. I'm here to say that I think that this is really kind of misplaced energy. And I think we're losing the plot. And I say this as somebody who's a sociologist who does a lot of research and teaching about crime data. So I can get into the minutia of the crime data. I'm not going to do that here. I've done that in plenty of kind of political ed workshops that Tamika mentioned when she introduced me. And you can find those workshops online if you want to kind of have a real, detailed primer about different crime statistics and so forth. But part of the reason why I say we're losing the plot is people are turning this into kind of a methodology exercise, or we're getting too caught up into conversations about data and methods. And we're thinking that the clues of how we should respond or the ways that we should fight back against what's happening politically is to get into the minutia of the data itself. And in the process, we're losing the plot in terms of what is the political function of crime data. And so I just want to point out a couple things. First is at the bottom of the screen is the biggest point. Crime data is inherently propaganda. I'm going to repeat that. Crime data is inherently propaganda. Propaganda is basically kind of media, discourse, framework, analysis, pop culture that is used and created to kind of help promote the police and to make the police seem like something that is needed, something that, is to legitimize policing and is to depict the police as kind of working towards public safety and the public good. And so there's a whole bunch written both in terms of scholarship and kind of more popular pieces and different work deconstructing crime, propaganda. But I want to really emphasize that crime data is part of this. And it's also, crime data is big business and crime policy is business. And a lot of the people who are weighing in some of these pieces that I mentioned and that I showed you on the screen about kind of what does the data say, some of those people are part of these industries. And so you have people who are, really want to kind of let you know that they know this crime data. Some are even kind of marketing their own data sources. So they're saying, well, the crime data sources you use don't really get into kind of, some of the specifics, and we have a crime data source. And there's a whole world of kind of crime data entrepreneurialism where you have different crime data sources kind of competing with each other, and for-profit companies and nonprofits competing with each other to kind of have their crime data be, quote unquote, the data source to go to set for policy, right? There's a lot of people who want to be policy influencers. There's also people who want to be kind of the cited data, and some of them are creating their own software to do it, right? And so they're some of the ones who are weighing in on this as well. And so we want to think about crime data as propaganda. We'll also talk in a moment, I'll talk about what is another political function of crime data that is being used in all of this. But the reason I bring this up is that we want to remember that crime data and crime is being used as a pretext to justify bringing more policing, as well as to militarize cities. And that this is, in the end, what is happening. It's a way to kind of advance a federal government agenda under this administration. It's a way to advance more authoritarianism. It's a way to bring more state violence to a local level. And it's a way to kind of fuck with, state and local leadership. And those state and local leadership might be, politically milquetoast from our perspective, but it's a way for the federal government to do that. And so this is really a political battle over kind of authority, jurisdiction, whose agenda will you maintain, and so forth. But it is done through this conversation of crime. And because crime is so kind of a political lightning rod, but also, as we'll talk about in a moment, because of the racism associated with conversations about crime, it also can be very seductive for a lot of people. And a lot of people who might see themselves even being politically opposed to fascism or certain kinds of forms of authority of this current political administration can be seduced through kind of all these discourses and rhetorics about crime. And so one thing is that I want to kind of just point out is that the crime data conversation is also happening about, should militarization take over? But we're also losing the political plot here as well in some cases. So what you have, for example, is some of these stories where people are saying, well, basically a lot of these kind of commentaries are saying we accept the idea that there's a crime problem. We might even kind of, look at the same data that you're looking at. We just think that your quote unquote solution to the problem is the issue. And so some of these people aren't necessarily opposed to the idea of that crime is an issue that has to be dealt with in a particular way. They're just saying, don't have the National Guard do it, leave it to local law enforcement. And so some of these crime data conversations, but also some of the critiques of the crime data conversations and some of the critiques of militarization are actually working against abolition, and it's actually working to rehabilitate the image of the police. And so you have, for example, some military people who are very opposed to militarization, but they're actually kind of making the police look like good guys here and kind of rehabilitating this image of the police. And that, in the end, is losing the plot about kind of what is the function of crime data. Crime data is to advance policing, regardless of if you think that the policing should be done by the National Guard or if you think it should be done by local police. You're still advancing the idea that certain cities need to have extra policing. And we'll talk about the racist kind of undertones of that in a moment. But here, for example, are some quotes that kind of get at this. So, this was a recent story, about the National Guard being deployed. And people, are raising these critiques. Well, they say, although they have the mission of domestic disturbances, they don't get a lot of training in it. This is, the military. And they certainly don't get the extensive training, the nuances that, for example, the police get. And then someone says, the military mindset is wrong. The police look at people in front of them as citizens who may be misbehaving, but they're citizens. The military looks at people out there and sees threats that need to be neutralized and that could lead to bad things. So I want you to just kind of pick up here, what I'm putting down. I'm saying that this is an example of where even the critiques of the military and how kind of crime data is being used to bring in the military, the critiques of that are still advancing this idea of it's still propaganda, and they're still basically saying, who should police, and they're also creating a very benign positive image of policing as just being supposedly better trained. There's a lot of discourse that they're better at kind of handling weapons, that they deal with communities differently. And so we want to kind of remember not to lose the plot. And the plot is both about critiquing fascism, but it's critiquing criminalization and policing, which is central to fascism, but also what allows for certain communities to be already under existing subjugation that fascism just intensifies. So this is Paul Vallas, for example, and Paul Vallas, had run for mayor of the city of Chicago. He also is somebody who's involved in school privatization takeovers. I remember protesting him decades ago in the city I lived in when he was part of the school privatization going on in the public school system. And he says the city needs federal aid and intervention to help fight crime. That doesn't mean deploying the National Guard, however. Without local leaders and police collaboration, they could create an environment of civil unrest, administrative confusion, would turn an apolitical public safety issue, reducing crime, into a chaotic media frenzy. The National Guard couldn't help make arrests or answer 911 calls, the real thing Chicagoans need. And so the reason I bring all this up is that not all the critiques of what President Trump is doing is helping in terms of challenging the way that policing is being used to justify the racial and class subjugation and spatial subjugation of communities that President Trump is threatening with bringing militarization in. So I want to talk about another function of crime data. I already mentioned that it's inherently propaganda, but crime data is also a tool of racial criminalization. And the definition of racial criminalization I'm using comes from Dr. Khalil Gibran Muhammad, and he is the author of the book, The Condemnation of Blackness, Race, Crime, the Making of Modern Urban America. And I highly recommend this book if you are not familiar with it. But he talks about how racial criminalization is the stigmatization of crime as, quote, Black, and the masking of crime among whites as individual failure. So basically, Blackness and crime get treated as interchangeable, and whiteness, doesn't get criminalized, even if white people are accused of or charged with something that's considered a crime. And what he talks about is that, when crime data really starts getting established, there's different examples of it in the 1850s, but it was around the 1880s that you see kind of more national crime data being collected. And he talks about how it's during this time period that the statistical rhetoric of the, quote, Negro criminal became a proxy for a national discourse on Black inferiority. As a so-called objective measure, it also became a tool to shield white Americans from the charge of racism when they used Black crime statistics to support discriminatory public policies and social welfare practices. So crime data is not just a tool of propaganda. Crime data is also a way to try to racially criminalize groups, to try to treat as quote unquote scientific and therefore non-biased the ways that people basically try to talk about, in particular, Black people, but also try to justify the subjugation of Black people through carceral means, and to try to treat it as an unbiased scientific debate instead of a political agenda. And so I just want to point out Dr. Toni Morrison, she's somebody who's influenced a lot of my thinking around data. And she talks a lot about data and sorting out data. And one of the things she says is, she says, no policy decision could be understood without the Black topic at its center, even or especially when unmentioned. Not housing, not education, the military, economy, voting, citizenship, prisons, loan practices, healthcare. Name it, the real subject was what to do with Black people, which became a substitute term for poor people. And this is where she gets at, in the next quote, she gets at how this is a way to kind of maintain the afterlife of slavery. And she says, in this racism, the slave body disappears, but the Black body remains and is morphed into a synonym for poor people, a synonym for criminalism, and a flashpoint for public policy. For there's no discourse in economics and education and housing and religion and healthcare and entertainment, in the criminal justice system and welfare and labor policy, in almost any of the national debates that continue to baffle us, in which the Black body is not the elephant in the room, the ghost in the machine, the subject, if not the topic of the negotiations. And this is important because one of the things that, people like Ida B. Wells Barnett and W.E.B. Du Bois, when crime data, statistics were being kind of rolled out and people were trying to make, inferences about Black people and what to do with Black people post Reconstruction through the crime data stats, Du Bois and Wells Barnett, they were very critical of that. And they were very aware that this was a political agenda to maintain ongoing subjugation of Black people and to try to maintain the relations of slavery through kind of the carceral system post-emancipation. And this is not to say that, carcerality and militarization policing only affects Black people, because it's really to draw attention to the fact that the way that anti-Blackness is operating becomes the way in which society gets organized around these topics, around these policies. And that organization of policy is definitely going to impact other groups, regardless of if they're Black or not, or what they think about Black people. And we see this going on in DC and with the threats of rolling out militarization in other cities, that is going to impact your quality of life as well. And so there's a vested interest in not just challenging what this is doing to Black people, that should be the first and foremost priority, but to also understand that what happens to Black people is basically a way to structure policy that eventually will impact everybody unless we're willing to kind of challenge how that is being structured against Black people. So just really quick, I would recommend these two works. Elizabeth Hinton, she has a newer book called America on Fire. And one of the things that she shows, and goes back to a point that Tamika raised in the introduction, but that a lot of the rolling out of the National Guard, or the kind of recalling in the National Guard for local kind of policing, often was done against Black people. And everything from kind of civil rights to urban rebellions to protest. And so there's also a way where protest has been racialized as Black in this country, even if you are not necessarily, if you're not a Black person. But if you're defying a political authority and you're standing up in a certain way against white supremacy or capitalism, that has often been racialized as Black. And there's often been more military kind of operations against quelling Black protests, particularly Black protests that Black people are involved in. But also, one of the major proponents of kind of the federal government being involved in policing, and not necessarily always through the National Guard, but the federal government being involved in policing, was Lyndon Johnson. And so you have both liberals and conservatives who have helped build up to this moment. You also have the way that President Johnson did it was through also combining the war on poverty with the war on crime. And President Johnson is actually a major figure in the development of crime data. He is somebody who pushed for more data on the extent of crime. And there are two what are considered kind of federal government data sources on crime. One is the Uniform Crime Report that the FBI puts out. That's the one that often gets cited quite a lot in political debates. But the other one is the National Crime Victimization Survey, and that comes right out of different policies and research that President Johnson called for. And I just want to point out one last thing, is that connected to kind of some of the work that Elizabeth Hinton has done, Dr. Hinton. This is my last slide, and this is a call for a united front against fascism that the Black Panther Party called for in the late 1960s. And one of the things they said is that we need to kind of, put aside some of our political ideological differences. So they recognized among progressives, they said, we got to kind of set aside some of these differences. So they recognized that there is political and ideological differences among progressives and leftists, but they said we need to create a united front against fascism. And one of the things that they did was they understood that policing was something that was meant to target Black people and to maintain capitalism, but it was also a way to maintain political authority against social protest and social critique against how the society is organized and structured. And one of the things that they did was they also made linkages between war, militarization, the military, and the police. And I think they provide some useful ways to think through this political moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tamara. I am so grateful for all of the things that you raised here, and really kind of setting the stage for this next conversation. We're really excited. We're going to jump right into it, and bring on stage our Chicago and DC folks, Kelly and Nini, are going to join us, and we're going to talk a little bit about, not a little bit, we're going to have a good conversation about what's happening in, what's happening on the ground, and the ways in which we're seeing what Tamara kind of laid out playing out in real time in these cities. So welcome, y'all. Thank y'all so much for being here. Just want to start and just say, either one of you can go first, but as organizers on the ground in DC and Chicago, what do people know about what is happening, the threat and the reality of state violence in your city?
I can go first, Kelly, if you're okay with that.
Please do.
Yeah, actually, it's what you don't see of the police threat in our city. The media doesn't show exactly all that's happening in DC. You do hear you hear the and see about ICE and about our neighbors being snatched by ICE off out of the communities. But what you don't see in the intercommunities, in the Black most marginalized communities in DC, you don't see the kidnapping of the black bodies, where we have the different law enforcement agencies coming in, DAC, FBI, the Border Patrol, Homeland Security, the U.S. Marshals, with the National Guards, literally Secret Service. They're literally like lined up in our most marginalized, oppressed communities and kidnapping bodies, harassing them and arresting them for small things as little as drinking an open container of a beer, or like just blocking the sidewalk. How Black people just sit on the sidewalk and you sit in chairs. It's called blocking the sidewalk, and it is against the law in DC to block the sidewalk, but they're literally arresting people for those. Right now we have 2,000 people who have been arrested. Majority of them are misdemeanors for Trump to get numbers, and that's what they're not showing on TV. So those some of the things that you don't see on the ground. The Jim Crow era that's actually happening right now in DC. People being arrested for walking, for being Black after midnight.
Thank you so much for that context. Activists in Chicago, just like activists in DC, have been organizing against state violence for generations. We are a major hub of PIC, prison industrial complex abolitionists, and organizing in this country. And we've been pushing back against the violence of police and the violence of the deportation machine for a long time. I think those lineages of organizing have helped prepare us for this moment of escalation when the Trump administration has taken aim at our city. He's been back and forth about whether or not he's going to send the National Guard here. At the moment, he seems to have pivoted, saying he's going to take his fascist displays of militarism to a state with a governor who's more welcoming of those interventions. But Trump is a mercurial, reactive man, and I don't think we should ever put any faith in anything that he says. The Guard could still wind up here. For now, I think it is a big deal that Chicago's Mayor Brandon Johnson, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, and the people of Chicago have held the line, and that our city isn't presently being used to normalize the military occupation of cities in the US. I think we also owe a huge debt to the people of LA and DC for their resistance, both in terms of the knowledge folks have been sharing with us as we prepared, and the resistance people have waged in the courts and especially in the streets, because all of this has a cumulative effect each time Trump tries to come for any of our cities. None of us are resisting in isolation. We are all affecting the broader conditions that enable or impede Trump's violence. Lastly, I just want to say that while the Guard isn't here right now, waves of federal agents are, and they are attacking our communities. They have detained multiple people this week. We don't believe we've seen the worst of that yet. So this is really a time for people to double down on supporting rapid response networks and engaging with local ecosystems of care and defense. Shout out to the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights and to Organized Communities Against Deportation, and to all of our rapid response crews here in town. They deserve everyone's support.
Thank you so much. I want to ask you, Nini, because I think DC is so interesting. We saw Janine Pirro talking about prosecution, and I know I follow a bunch of the Harriet's Wildest Dreams crew on Instagram, and y'all have been very good at like letting people know what's happening. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening in the courts in DC right now? You're on mute, Nini. Sorry.
Yeah, just like Kelly said, that we're not new to this work, we're true to this work. And we've been fighting for Black people liberation for over 400 years. And so because of this, what have happened is that we have a surge of what's happening because of Trump trying to take control of Washington, D.C. in a federalization way and in an authoritarianism way and create a fascism country. So he has occupied D.C. And unlike Chicago, we are not a state in DC. And so therefore we have home rule, but everything we do in DC have to go through Congress. And so DC is as a testing ground for Trump, right? And so because of that, with Jenny Pirro, they just making rules up, just making things up as they go with executive orders. And so right now they're literally trying to charge 14-year-olds as adults, and they come into our court system and trying to arrest everybody for everything. And actually, because we already have a court watch program, I'm sorry, y'all. I meant to put that on mute.
Thought that was my phone.
So I'm sorry, y'all. That's my phone and it's busy, and I took time out to talk to you all tonight, right? So forgive me. But what we already had programs in place because we've been fighting against these oppressed systems before Trump escalated the situation. And so we have a court watch program and a jail support program and participatory defense. And because we have a court watch program, as they arrest our people, we're at the courthouse watching the courts and we kidnapping them back, right? And we actually providing services where we can help fight those charges, which majority of them are misdemeanors and getting dropped. The judge is actually like, they're just livid at what's going on with the U.S. Attorney Office because it's a circus, it's a clown show, and she's asking, would you normally ask for a hold for this? And right now a law just changed in D.C. where if they have probable cause for something, they can hold people, and it overrules the Fourth Amendment right. So if it's probable cause that person may have done something, even if their Fourth Amendment right was violated, they can be held in the prison cell. And so we actually fighting against that, showing up and keeping our community safe and teaching people how to film the police, how to know your rights. We're going into the trenches like, hey, know your rights. And that has really like helped get the numbers down. We started at 165 when it first started. Now we at 105 because we're giving our people the tools to fight back. And that's by knowing your rights and filming the police, which are programs already in place for DC.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of that, I saw a video, Kelly, on Instagram with Chicago Teachers Union, when parents were leaving, handing out like know your rights and doing know your rights education with parents as they were leaving the schools, just in preparation for what might come. And I'm curious if you can speak to, you both talked about the long history of resistance in your cities. If you can speak to what organizers are up to, what are people doing on the ground to resist right now?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned our teachers because the Chicago Teachers Union is an amazing organization and they have been doing outstanding work. They created a sanctuary schools toolkit that they've actually made available nationally so teachers everywhere can look at it and potentially adapt it to help them make plans in their schools for when ICE shows up. But here in practice, it means that our schools have sanctuary school teams. There are teachers who have assigned roles, just like in any rapid response situation of What is your part to play when ICE shows up? How do we handle this? And there are different formations like that across the city in different contexts. The groups that I mentioned, ICER and OCAD, have done a great job educating our communities about their rights. And that has gone such a long way. Tom Homan has complained about how hard it is to apprehend people here in Chicago because we're, quote, a very educated city. Our people have been schooled up in how to try to stay out of the path of danger in the first place. But of course, with some of these targeted arrests, they show up and they take people before anyone could possibly get there to offer support. So it's still a really daunting situation. I do want to mention, because I saw in the chat several people asking about where can we get reliable information about these things that are happening. And I want to really stress the importance of independent media right now. I work for Truth Out, so I have that bias. I happen to think that Truth Out is a great independent news organization. But whatever independent news organization you believe in and you find useful, please support them, because the truth is a front of struggle right now. The mainstream media has capitulated. They have sold us out. So we need to support the newsmakers, the journalists that are doing the work for real and that are actually telling stories of struggle. I also want to mention that I've been involved with an effort to help people map local networks of support and defense in their communities in Chicago. I worked with some friends to create a worksheet a couple of weeks ago called Mapping Community Defense and Care in Our Neighborhoods. That's very much grounded in the work of interrupting criminalization. And that worksheet is meant to help groups of people around the city ask the right questions about what organizations and resources exist in their neighborhoods, who's already working together and who should be, and where there are gaps to be filled or weak spots to be reinforced in our lines of care and defense. And I've been really glad to hear that organizations, collectives, and church groups around the city have been using that worksheet to strengthen their plans and analysis. A lot of people have also taken to the streets to protest, which is so important. I wish I could be out there with them, but I haven't been able to yet because I'm nursing a busted ankle. So instead, I've been spending a lot of time leading workshops, organizing workshops, thinking alongside folks so that we can sharpen our skills in this moment. But I do want to say that we need to welcome more of those folks who are getting activated in the streets into networks of care and defense. Marches can really embody the political energy of a moment in necessary ways, but energy is not infrastructure. I think a lot of folks have been conditioned to participate in big movement moments without necessarily joining political projects that sustain movements. So we need to issue those invitations right now. We need to welcome people into spaces where we're doing this defensive work. So we all need to work together to shift those gears.
Yeah.
Nini, tell us. We know y'all on the front lines. We also seen your sister Afeni get arrested and folks show up and turn out at the courts in support of her. Talk to us about what organizers are doing and seeing.
Yeah, that's the same thing. So Free DC Project, we literally, because we had already knew that this was going to happen, right? When you do the work, you don't have to, you stay ready so you don't have to get ready. And so because of that, we actually had a little hand up on what was going to happen. So usually at Free DC, we're literally like building where we need like 25,000 people in DC just to not comply, right? Where we know that with that percentage, we actually can build a movement where if we decide to boycott, not pay our taxes, do jury notification, we're training our people so that we can get ready for the long haul, because this is not going to end tomorrow. And so from the long haul with Free DC, that's the work we're doing on a 5-year campaign to keep Trump down and protect DC home rule until we can get to that 5th year where we're going to have statehood, right? But in the process of doing that and training our people up on non-corporation training, we actually have like Tamika just said, we have cop watch, right? We have cop watch programs. We have rapid response programs where each group we get a message. Hey, ICE is here. Someone's been arrested here. Each ward has a rapid response group where we're going out and we're going to confront we're going to try to catch and confront the kidnappers, the people who are actually committing unconstitutional acts among our people. The good part is that we got a victory today. We got a victory. The executive order did not get passed. Didn't the Congress did not extend or was not going to ask to extend the executive order. So the victory that it did end, and so Trump controlled over the MPD, our local police offices officers, is over. So now we got Mayor Bowser have a time. She has a chance to like stand for the people because now she doesn't have to listen to Trump. So whatever happened in DC from here on is at the hands of our mayor and our local police officer, our local police agency to actually work with these people because the federal people are here. And I want to name DC has always been the most over police state in the country. We have over 32 police agencies in DC. So we already had the police. We already had the police here, but it just got more. And so our goal is to hope that they don't interact with ICE and all the federal agencies like they have been under Trump watch, right? So that's a victory, and it happened because we fought back. We was in the streets. We were not going to accept it, and we was up at Congress like, hey, don't sign this to be extended. And so we did get that victory. And the only thing that's left right now is the National Guards, right? And ICE, and we don't have to. DC ain't got to work with them. That's not our job. So that's it. And so with that being said, we're going to continue with our, training our people up to resist. Down the line, we got to call for national people to show up and help us protect DC home rule, which I guess Tamika we'll talk about in a little bit. But we're doing the work. We're on the front lines. And the good part is these programs has already been in place. So we're just training people to to add on to more people because it's a surge on people being arrested by ICE and by the federal police.
Nini, I would love for you to explain the DC home rule to folks what that means, and then I'm gonna ask one more question before we get it because the chat is popping and people have questions, and I know y'all have been answering some of them, but I want to make sure we can bring Tamara back and we can really do it the full Q&A. But before we do that, can you explain, because we've mentioned it a couple times, what DC home rule is?
Yeah. So unlike like Chicago, shout out to the Chicago mayor. I was like, yes, go for it. I'm so happy for you. We don't have the luxury to say that we don't want the National Guards because DC is owned by federal and Congress, right? So if somebody say, the National Guards got to come to DC, they have to. DC has home rule. Everything that we do, we have our local mayor and our council people, but everything that we vote for in DC, we don't have a vote in Congress, right? Ours is our local vote. We have a senator that she gets the right vote on like bills, but the overall vote DC doesn't have. We taxation without no representation in Congress. And so with that said, anytime we make a budget or a law, it have to go to Congress and Congress have to approve it. We've never had no problems with this. Usually they just let us govern ourselves because we pay our own taxes. We pay more federal taxes than majority some of these states that's actually a state. And so this is why we need DC to be a 51st state. And right now we had $100 billion, and they kept our money because she was like, "Oh, we're not having a parade, so we're not giving y'all money." And we fought to try to get our money back. So we did get it freeze, but they still got our money, and it's up to Congress to like sign off. They're like, "Here, DC, you all can have y'all money," and so everything. So because of that, our mayor is like word that if we do too much pushing, that they can strip home rule from us. And like the Republicans, this administration, right now we got 14 bills sitting up there where they literally trying to like overrule DC, and what Congress say overrules what our city council say. So right now we got a bill sitting there to say take away DC home rule. If the Senate vote yes, take away DC home rule, we lose home rule. We got a bill to say charge 14-year-olds as adults. If the Senate vote and they say yes, charge 14 years olds with a as an adult, it happens in DC. So they control DC in our legislation. But we didn't have this problem before Trump became president. And so she moving with care, and she's trying to play with the devil. But we telling that you have to be on the people's side because it's no compromising with him. Every time we give him something, he moves the bar. So right now it's just we either resist or concede. And the people in DC, we resisting. And we want our council and our mayor to join us and resist Trump and his administration as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. The last question I have before we shift is and this is the question that I see in the chat repeatedly, is really, we hear them talking, we hear them talking about coming into Baltimore. We hear after the situation just happened in Charlotte, threatening to send National Guard into Charlotte, and a number of other places. And so it's a twofold question. One is, what might you say to folks in other cities about how they can get ready to resist? And then also, what might you say to folks in other cities and states about how they can stand in solidarity with y'all? I know, like I mentioned earlier, I'm from South Carolina originally, and I know South Carolina sent their National Guard to go do ICE stuff in in other cities. And so I'm curious what you might say to folks who are in other parts of the country, both to prepare themselves to fight back in the event that they become a target for this occupation, but also, even if they are not, how can they stand in solidarity with folks in DC and Chicago?
I would say, if you are in the path, of this kind of violence, map your ecosystems of community defense and support. I know there are people in other cities who have been using the workshop that we made with Chicago, the worksheet that we made with Chicago in mind. Maybe there's an adapted version that's even better for your community. Just take what other folks have been doing, adapt it, figure out how to map your ecosystem, build a loving and rebellious culture of opposition, learn how to facilitate people's movement assemblies, invite people to come together to do politics rather than just talk about politics. And in terms of supporting Chicago, I would say, I really want to draw our attention to how we talk about this stuff, and taking some lessons from the presentation we all just heard a few minutes ago. Please do not fixate on whether crime is up or down in Chicago. Yes, there is less violence in our communities right now. That comes from a lot of hard work, from a lot of violence interruption, and a lot of mental health care that people have been working to get into our community. Like, so much good work has gone into reducing violence. That's a true story. And also, if there comes a day where there is more violence happening in the community, that will still not be a reason to let Donald Trump take more power over our lives here in Chicago. That will not be a reason to let a fascist authoritarian government that is in the process of consolidating power do another power grab. That has to be resisted under all possible conditions. Like, Donald Trump doesn't care about crime rates, just like he doesn't care if someone actually entered this country illegally or not, when he makes a spectacle of harming people who seem like they might be immigrants. We have to be just as uncompromising in our values when we say that this administration should not get to decide anyone's fate. This administration should not get to seize power over any of our cities, over any of our lives. We have to be utterly unyielding in our politics. And that's how you support Chicago. That's how you fight for your own cities. And, I believe in us. I really believe in us. And I think that, we have to hold that belief together. So believe in Chicago and believe in each other.
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, like I stated, DC is not a state. And the reality is, this is not about public safety. If it was about public safety, Trump and Congress wouldn't have cut jobs, wouldn't have cut healthcare, wouldn't have cut the things SNAP. Poverty causes crime. Let's be reality. Let's get to the root of what causes crime, and everything that causes crime, Trump cut. The gun laws. He want to increase the gun laws. Even here in DC, they just passed a law that people can carry rifles in DC, and it's a misdemeanor. So let's be true that this is not about public safety. This is about authoritarianism and fascism. It's about Trump having DC to become his kingdom, right? He want DC to be his kingdom. This is his testing ground, and DC is an easy target because we're not a state. So what we need you all to do from our national cities and states is to stand with DC. Call your congressperson, demand that the National Guards leave our city, and demand that any law, any bill that come by from these Republicans that's introduced to attack DC home rule, have your congressperson vote against it. Because when DC win, you all can win. Because if a state who is for a city that has no that has no control over our bills and legislation without Congress. If we can win this, anybody can win it. Just like the mayors that's standing up to Trump now. We don't have that. We can't stand up, but we can with people power. And so what we're asking nationally, as we fight here locally, you fight nationally for DC. Because if DC win, you win. I promise you. And for our people that's like in Baltimore, we already connected. And we believe here in DC that we keep us safe. And so that's the tools that we're doing that was already in place, where we're doing mutual aid, neighbors helping neighbors, right? We uplifting each other and teaching them the different things to survive, right? Because right now, 300 Black women have lost their jobs. And so what causes poverty? Crime, right? People they gotta live these essential things in life. And so that's what we're doing. We're providing essential things in life that people need so that they won't attack each other. We know that crime happens, but there's no such thing as Black crime. It's intercommunity violence. No matter where you at, violence will happen if it's poverty, right? And so therefore what we got to do is use alternatives to solutions, to invest in resources and not cops, invest in resources and not National Guards. We're spending $1 million a day in DC on federal agencies and National Guards to be here. Do you know if we take that $1 million a day and invest it into resources that keep people safe, the world will be a safer space? And so let's be real about what's going on here. It's about authoritarianism and fascism country, and DC is the testing ground. So we need you all to rise up with DC, protect DC home rule, and any attacks that they have on DC. And we win, you are going to win too.
Thank you so much. We're gonna take a couple questions, y'all, because I definitely did not moderate well and let this conversation go longer. But I do want to. There's a couple questions that I really want to pull. Several people have asked about, and Nina, I'm going to toss this your way. Have asked about homeless folks and the impact of what's happening on homeless folks, and how to prepare and protect.
Yeah, for us, when people was becoming unhoused, we literally tried to get there because he don't want people. The reality was we had an encampment on the way to his tennis court. I mean, to his golf course, and he just didn't want to see the people in the house. And so we actually like pulled together with our unhoused, the people that do unhoused, because we don't believe in homeless people. We don't call people homeless. They're unhoused or they homelessness, because it's not a choice that they don't have a home. It's the government that's not giving them housing. And so we're trying to like bring the resources together where we actually put them up until we can get DC to find somewhere for them to go. And some of the people are safer on the streets than they feel in a shelter, because shelters is violence. And so they feel safer outside until they can get somewhere they can feel that they're safe, that's not in a shelter. So between that and people, mental health care, we need mental health care. You want them to come off the streets, get them some mental health care. People, some of them believe like that's where they belong. And so those are things that we've been actually supporting people with and been training people. For us, we train people to be mental health responders, where we can actually like recognize someone with a mental crisis, but we can't diagnose them, but we know that they're in a mental crisis, and we handle them with care instead of with cops, right? And so that's what we do. We here just trying to take care of each other, and that comes with resources, but the money is going to the cops and not to the people that's actually doing the work to keep DC safe.
Thank you, Nini. I want to. There's a few questions about how to make what's happening more visible, and I'm opening up to any of you who want to share. People are like, we didn't know about these, particularities of what's happening. Especially I think that question really came in response to what you were naming, Kelly, around people getting snatched up by federal agents. How do folks make this more visible? How do they help to get the word out about what's happening?
For me, the media job is to sell stories, not tell stories. And so therefore, as you watch the media, it's kind of hard, because even if we tell our story, or we say what's happening. They don't report. They will not report what's happening because they're not going to show that we literally rising up. People are like, what y'all doing in DC? No, we kicking ass in DC, but you're not going to see that in the media because they don't want to show that we're resisting. They want to show we're actually, I don't know what's happening in Chicago, but when they come into our communities, they're literally coming with a film production company and showing where they're actually arresting people and like, look, see, we got a gun, and not showing the policemen's actually beating up and throwing people down. They're not showing that. They may show that one gun that they got out of 30 incidents that they done arrested people and illegally winning people cars. They won't show that on TV. They'll show where someone resisted or something, and that's what they sell, right? And so, like Kelly said, independent media and actually following the organizations that's doing the work. We try not to show that on our social media because it's called trauma porn, right? We don't need to show our people being abused, so you won't see that on our pages because it's trauma porn, and it actually hurts us more than hurt our people more. Then we get desensitized by it, so it's kind of hard to show what's happening because it's violent to show what's happening, and we have to protect our mental health.
I want to name that 1 week from today, I'm going to have an episode of Movement Memos that is going to be sort of a rally style episode that all through the episode we'll be hearing from organizers who are on the ground here in Chicago doing work, including folks in OCAD, including folks who are part of About Face, people who are trying to organize folks within the military to refuse to participate in Trump's aggression. So I would say, look to resources that are uplifting the voices of actual organizers, of people who are doing the work, and also, as you just heard, like look directly to these organizations, like stay abreast of what they are saying and what they're putting out there information wise. But I'm really lucky that my day job is in movement media, that I get to help amplify these stories. And I think we're all fortunate that there are good reporters out there still in the independent sphere who are trying to tell these stories in an honest way. So please amplify the stuff that you find that's legit, that you believe in. Support and amplify those organizations.
Yep.
Tamara, I don't know if you wanted to add in on this particular question around how to amplify even the information that you were sharing around crime data, because we know there is a narrative war, and they are very good, like Nini was saying, at selling a story. And so, how can people talk about and share and uplift what we're learning here?
So thank you so much. And I really just appreciate what Kelly and Nini talked about, and I learned a lot from it. But is it okay, Tamika, if I go back to kind of another point from my presentation that I think for a suggestion? Sure. One of the things is that I think we could try to push more in our local states for like non-cooperation, because part of what's happening, as I had pointed out, is that, sometimes we get like kind of militarization of policing and all that kind of intersects, but it's like there's ways where, President Trump is calling on state governments to kind of have their National Guard play certain roles in other states or in, DC, or to like basically start serving in kind of military capacity and like immigration enforcement capacity and so forth. And so there's ways where that's something that a governor in a lot of cases has to agree to, and so there's pressure that you could put on our governors to kind of say, this is what, as residents, like, we don't want this type of non-cooperation. I mean, obviously you would have to organize and mobilize, but it's like, there's a way where just because it's not happening directly in your state, that you can't try to show solidarity, but also kind of develop a growing opposition of non-cooperation with this agenda through kind of how you can put pressure on your own governor and local state elected officials, but also sometimes to have to try to support your elected officials when they do stand up to these administrations, even as you're also obviously trying to challenge your state officials for the ways that they fail you in the state, and and maintain, it's going to be a balance, right? But there has to be more, I think, non-cooperation between states with this agenda. And there is a way where you could say, how can you make your governor not issue the National Guard for these things in this moment, that is something that you could try to put that type of pressure on in terms of mobilizing. And that dovetails with some of the stuff that Kelly was saying about an anti-war movement, and in an effort to kind of get military folks to kind of, do conscientious objection in this political moment, right? Like, we're so used to thinking of conscientious objection historically with, like, the Vietnam War, but there have always been efforts to kind of get military personnel to consciously object. We have to also think about, what does it mean to consciously object in this political moment, and how can you kind of reactivate people to work in support of that conscientious objection?
Thank y'all so much. This was amazing. Y'all are all amazing. The work that y'all are doing is so phenomenal. And I'm very inspired by all of you all the time. So I'm really grateful. Sometimes I get the great pleasure of being like, who are my dream guests for these organizing calls? So I'm really grateful for y'all. I want to share with all of our viewers that there are some links, and I know y'all have seen them come up on the bottom of the screen. And also, if you registered for this call, all the links will come out in the email tomorrow. So everybody who registered for this call will get a link tomorrow. I'm not sure I don't know if the registration closed. You might still be able to go into our link tree and register if you hadn't already. And also, if you don't get the email and you're like, I really want to get that email with all those links and resources and connections to organizations and links to Kelly's podcast and all the things, send us an email, organizing@womensmarch.com. So just send us over an email and we will do our best to get you all of the links and the resources. I also want to say, just as a follow-up to what Tamara just offered, is that we are working on, fingers crossed, it'll happen in the next month, a non-compliance training. And so we're working to bring that to you all. So stay tuned. And we'll continue to be bringing you all connections, as Kelly was saying, to organizations that you can land in, because we agree, like the mobilization is the one tactic, but it has to be a part of a larger movement, ecosystem, and infrastructure. And it is very important. It is a great on-ramp, but it is very important to name that it is an entry point and not the landing place. It is the doorway and not the house, okay? So we want you to come on in the house and sit on the couch and stay a while. And so land in, find an organization to land in, to continue to be in this work. And we will continue to try to connect you to and introduce you to organizations doing phenomenal work across the country. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Risa, who's going to close us out. Thank y'all so much again, Kelly, Tamara, Nini. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here with us tonight. Like Tamika said, we will have information out to you if you registered. We will be sending those links out in the next 24 hours, and we cannot wait to see you on the next one. Thanks again for being with us tonight. Have a good one.